When all the Hebrew people were brought from Egypt to the land that God was to show them, to the land of Canaan, the Canaanites were there and living in the land. God led the people through a lot of battles as they took over the land, and then as the 12 tribes of Jacob settled the land was divided among the 12 tribes. The land straddled the Jordan River. On one side, it became the property of the tribes of Manasseh and Reuben. On the other side, the land was divided: Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, Reuben, Simeon, all of those others. Scattered among the whole works was the tribe of Levi as the priests. They were part of the connection that kept them unified, kind of. But it was a pretty loose confederation of tribes. And as the tribes recognized that, okay, Manasseh and Reuben don't always know what Gad and Asher and those areas are up to. We kind of keep track of this a little bit, and we're there to support one another. But the tribes started recognizing, hey, wait a minute. This whole country to the north of us has its own king. And somebody said, well, what about the ones east of us? They've got a king too. And south of all of the tribes, they recognized that, all right, that nation has its own king too. What about us? We're just this loose-knit bunch of 12 tribes. Why don't we have a king? We want a king. We want a king. Give us a king. Those who were following God closely said, hey, wait a minute, kind of hold it down a little bit here. God is your king. You're pushing back pretty hard against him. He's your king. Don't forget it. We want a king. We want a king. They kept at it. God, of course, heard what was going on. God spoke to Samuel, his prophet of the day, and said, Samuel, I'm going to send you, go to these people that want a king, and anoint Saul as a king. But Lord, you're the king. This is really a slap in your face. Samuel, just go do it. I'll give them a king. So Saul was anointed as king. And he was set up, took it pretty seriously, but eventually Saul became kind of moody and cranky and seemed to have some mental problems that just got in the way. He also thought he was a little bigger and better than he really was. He took this matter of being king pretty seriously. He wasn't always a man after God's own heart. And that was causing some problems. People recognized it. And so did God. So God spoke to Samuel again. Even though King Saul was still living, God spoke to Samuel and said, Samuel, go anoint a new king. And Samuel said, boy, you're really going to get me in trouble this time. King Saul is still living. If he hears that I anoint another king, I'll be killed for sure. Samuel, just do it. I'll show you what you're to do. Go to Jesse at Bethlehem. He's got lots of sons. And I will show you which one to choose. Samuel went to Bethlehem, told Jesse what he was there for, and so, one by one, Jesse's sons stood before the prophet. The father knew that soon a new king would be found. One by one, Jesse's sons stood before the prophet. There was Eliab. There was Abinadab. There was Shema. There was Nathaniel. 3, 6. There was one more. There were 7. And each time they passed in front of Samuel, the Lord said, no, not this one, not that one, not that one, not any of those. What's going on, Jesse? You got another son? And Jesse said, yeah, It's David. He's out taking care of the sheep. And Samuel said, go get him. We're not sitting down until he comes. One by one, Jesse's sons stood before the prophet. Each one passed until the last. No one thought to call him. No one thought that he would wear the crown. Everybody was looking at the outside of these guys. Everybody was looking to be, it would be the oldest, the best looking, the tallest, the strongest, and it turned out to be the youngest, David, the runt of the litter, the youngest kid that was out taking care of the sheep, so out of everybody's mind that they didn't even think to call him in when they knew that Samuel was there to anoint the next king. You'll have to read 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel to see how all of that fits together, because it wasn't a matter of just instantly David becoming king. It took some years before that happened. At the time that David was anointed, he was a youngster. He was a kid. He was out tending the sheep, and I can imagine that after the anointing, he washed off that messy oil, headed back out to check on the sheep. It was years before David became the king. In those years, David actually then was involved in, yes, the killing of Goliath. He was active with Saul's army. He even played the lyre and provided music when Saul got moody and cranky. At times, Saul was so fed up and so threatened by David, that Saul tried to kill David. And David had to run for his life. And there were times that David had an opportunity to kill Saul, but didn't. When Saul died, then David became the king. And he was ready. For the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul long before and gone to David. So this man, David, who nobody thought would ever wear a crown, was now the king. And under David, these tribes were unified and came together as a strong and powerful nation with God as their leader, in spite of having a king. And yet, David was one that they didn't even think to call. They didn't even think that he might be the one that would be anointed as the king. He was the youngest. He was out of sight. A shepherd boy became the king. God saw what others did not, as God always does. He always sees what we do not. You and I have some limitations in what we see and what we observe in other people. We don't always see as God sees. And those limits that we have lead us to put some limits on the people around us. Who does she think she is anyway? I would never have put those two together, and yet they're getting married? How come he got the promotion? There's a lot better qualified people around here than that. Well, it's about time somebody put her in her place. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of things that we say and think. Just the tip of the iceberg. We see part of a person's life, and then we judge that whole person by what we have just seen in a moment. By that one event, by that one comment, by that one mistake. And we refuse to look any further. And that's when we miss out on some awesome gifts that God sets in front of us. What about that kid next door that cranks up the music at such ungodly hours and keeps us awake on a summer night? What about that guy down the street that never seems to have his yard in decent shape? He never picks up his paper and it blows around. He's the last one on the block to shovel his sidewalk. He just gets in his car and he drives quietly away. Seems doesn't really care about the neighborhood at all. What about that waiter in the restaurant? You know, the one that spilled soup all over the front of you? Splattered it across the table the last time you ate there? What kind of a gift is that person to you? How about the gal who cut you off in traffic? The one that seemed to be in a hurry. We miss what gifts she has as well. And then there's the guy that's fresh out of prison, looking for a job and discovering he can't because everybody knows where he's been and what he did. What kind of gift is that person? What kind of gifts is God sending to us in that person that we don't see? Some of the best gifts God sends to us are people. And we miss them. We miss those gifts because of the limits we put on them. The very best gift that God has given us is his own Son. And I pray we don't miss that gift. Many people in the world easily do. It's easy to discount somebody who was born so long, long ago. It's easy to dismiss someone who, performed some miracles, did some teaching, lived by example and died. Yeah, that's all written in a book. That too can be easily dismissed. Some people discount them all and ignore the man called Jesus. Our human eyes get in the way of what we should be able to see. Yet this gift from God shepherds us through storm after storm after storm. This gift of God's own Son rescues us from disaster after disaster after disaster, even when those disasters are our own making. This gift from God wades right into the middle of our sinful lives and reminds us of his gracious, loving, and forgiving promises and presence. This gift from God tops it all off with giving his life for us, as only the one true shepherd would and could. Our vision also blocks us from seeing God's power in our lives. We take a look at financial problems that we have and we think, how am I going to pay those bills at the end of the month? We look at our own financial problems and we say, how are we going to ever be able to get the kids into school? Much less keep them there. We look at the troubles around us and we say, man, why can't my two brothers just be considerate of one another and kind to one another and visit with one another? Why do they always have to get so angry with each other? We look only at the difficulties around us. Man, why can't I get that kind of job? Why can't I have that promotion? Why can't I be the one responsible for that project? What is it about me that keeps me from getting that opportunity? We dwell so much on the problems, the difficulties, the threats, all of those kinds of things in our lives that sometimes we don't see the power of God working in our lives. God knows you the way you are. He created each one of us with a heart to follow him. And even when our hearts fail to follow him, he doesn't fail to follow us. He is, after all, the one who created us. And he is the one who, through his own shepherd son, reshapes us and forms us and broadens our limits of what we can see and what we can do and who we can become. There's more than just one shepherd who became king. David, yes. Jesus the shepherd as well. Jesus the shepherd became the king. From shepherd to king. True of both David and Jesus. In just a moment, Camille will sing a song titled Shepherd Boy. One by one, Jesse's sons stood before the prophet. Their father knew a king would soon be found. When each one passed, except the last, no one thought to call him. Surely he would never be a king. As you listen to the song, listen for David and the role he plays. Listen for God's actions. And listen for yourself.